Well, welcome everybody to the second webinar in a series by the IEA Greenhouse Gas R&D Programme, carried out in collaboration with our colleagues at CTCN, who will announce themselves shortly. For the benefit of those who don't know us, the IEA Greenhouse Gas R&D Programme is very proud to be part of the IEA's Energy Technology Network, and we've been incorporated in that since 1991. We have 32 members. We are a member-based organisation from 18 countries, but clearly we also include in that the OPEC, EU and CIAB, who also have a broad membership in their own right. We're a very member-focused organisation, and the members set our strategic direction and our technical program, so they lead in everything we do. And we are a technical based organisation. We don't attempt to define policy, and we are not advocates for any single technical solution. We follow very much the 2DS approach, that we need all technologies to meet that target. In terms of what we do, we have four main areas in a sense. We assess the different mitigation options and characterise them in terms of their potential to reduce CO2 emissions principally, but we do look at the other greenhouse gas options as well. Our main technical activities are that we track capture technology developments. Capture is seen as the most expensive part of the CCS chain, and it also has significant issues with energy penalty, and so we're looking at new developments in those technologies, and we monitor that to see what progress has been made in reducing both cost and the energy penalty. Geological storage is another key feature component that we look at, and particularly we're looking at storage performance, and we principally advise our members on the integrity, mechanical integrity, etc., of reservoirs, of injecting CO2 into storage reservoirs. And the confluence of all that is we provide our members and the policy audience through meetings like COP, CSLF and others with independent technical input to allow them, as I say, to make their decisions on their policy directions, but based on independent sound technical advice that we provide them. So that is my initial spiel. I can give you if you look at our spread of membership, you can see it is quite global with the members in the front. We have country members, we have major industrial sponsors, and on the very outside ring you see the sort of organisations that we collaborate with. And we are very much an organisation that's focused on collaboration. We know our budgets are finite, and therefore we look to get the best opportunities and the best bang for our buck, if you like, by working with organisations around the world. And you see we've worked with the European ZET platform, United Nations Framework on Climate Change through COP, the London Convention through the International Marine Organisation, and I mentioned CSLF earlier, and of course our main outpouring is through the IEA Energy Technology Network into the IEA in Paris and outwards through documents like the ETP and WIO. So at that point I will leave. I will pass over to Jason Spensley, who is the Climate Technology Manager at CTCN.
Greetings, and thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar. We're very glad to join you here as the International Energy Agency is a network member of CTCN. I'm very glad to introduce what CTCN is and what services it can provide to governments, to private sector, and to civil society. So I'll start with an overview, and then I'll talk about our services. The Climate Technology Center and Network, CTCN, is the operational arm of the UNFCCC's technology mechanism. So the global convention, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change's technology mechanism focus on climate technologies, with the operational dimension to support national implementation of the convention. Our mission is to strengthen technology cooperation and transfer between countries and enhance the development and deployment, scaling up of environmentally sound technologies in developing countries. This is all based on request for assistance from developing countries, and I'll get into that more in a moment. We are hosted by UNEP in partnership with UNIDO and 14 consortium members, a 14-member consortium spanning the spectrum of climate technology sectors and regions around the world. We're reinforced by a large network of climate technology service providers. Our target is 200 members. We're currently at 80, approximately 80, of which the International Energy Agency is one. Now, when we talk about technology, it's a broad definition under the convention that includes any equipment, technique, or knowledge and skill needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not just hardware, it's also the software, or as IPCC calls it, the orgware, skills, knowledge, and hardware for accomplishing both mitigation and adaptation. This is very important to say. The mandate from the COP is mitigation and adaptation, spanning the diversity of sectors, including energy, but not just energy. There are 3 service areas that we provide to countries on the request. One is technical assistance to developing countries based on official requests. We'll explain how to request. To overcome a barrier, to overcome a challenge for developing, scaling up, or financing climate technology solutions. This assistance is provided by our consortium and network members. We're a small team based in Copenhagen in the actual core of the center that simply has a coordinating function, and it's our consortium and network members who provide the assistance to countries. The second area of service is knowledge platform and exchange of knowledge. And the third area is support to collaboration and partnerships, and this webinar can be viewed as an example of that. I'm going to go into more depth now, next slide please, into technical assistance. We operate in this sphere of being quick, based on guidance from the Conference of the Parties. We're fast and easily accessible. However, the scale of our support is relatively small. This is to be differentiated from the GEF, for example, from the financing mechanism, let's say, of the UNFCCC, including the GEF and the GCF, where it's very fast, rapid support at a small scale. $50,000 to $250,000 value of technical assistance support. It's not project financing, it's specific technical assistance to a country that's provided by one of our network members or consortium partners for state-of-the-art and locally relevant expertise. And it can be for any technical assistance under the broad range of adaptation and mitigation technologies at any stage of the technology cycle. So it can include assessment of priorities, assessments of needs. We're receiving a lot of those, the very early stage, a lot of those support. Support in deciding on which technologies to use, having a third-party neutral analysis of the suite of different technology options in which to consider, help weighing pros and cons, cost-benefit analysis. Doing policy assessments or looking at options to create policies to move to scale up a certain technology, climate technology approach in a certain sector, looking at good practices in other countries, piloting new technology solutions, and support in seeking financing for scale-up of assistance. All of these stages, if you will, of the technology cycle are something that we can support, and we've been given from the mandate of the Conference of the Parties to support. Next slide, please. I think we maybe missed a slide. I'll just speak to it. How do we do so? There is a 3-page template, a 3-page form that is submitted from a developing country that is submitted to CTCN. It's that's basically a problem statement, and then we take it from there. This needs to be submitted, however, from a national designated entity. Each country, at the request of the COP, of the Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC, has named or is to name a national designated entity, a national focal point, if you will, to CTCN, and the requests flow through them. Currently 135 countries, I believe at last count, have named their national designated entity. The information of who they are is available on the CTCN website, and then this form is filled out. Often the request actually comes from a third party in the country, be it a line ministry or an NGO or a private sector institution requesting the support, and the designated entity, the government official, makes the call about priorities, so that, as you can imagine, not hundreds or dozens are coming in from one country, but a number of years. A number each year. And then we design a response plan, and we implement the technical assistance, contracting directly from funds that we have to our network and consortium partners. I'd like to highlight, I believe, one further point, and that's the importance of technology, climate technology neutrality. We don't endorse, per se, any specific climate technology. We endeavor to support governments and countries and proponents that we get the requests from to make decisions themselves on technologies that are most relevant to their contexts. We do, however, provide information and technical assistance to help them make the right decisions, and to right decisions based on their priorities, based on factual information and best available science of different technology solutions, in order to, so that they can develop and scale up their capacity to address climate change. That's the brief introduction. All of this information is available on our website, ctc-n.org. We're designed to be mandated by the COP to be easy access. Feel free, if anybody wants to follow up with me or any of my colleagues, to send an email to our account, and we'll be happy to answer any questions on this. We are inviting and encouraging more requests for technical assistance. We're currently at about 50, and we'd like more. We're open to more. We have budget to support more. So please strike while the window is open and available in both adaptation and mitigation areas. That's our brief introduction, and thank you again for this opportunity to share. And thank you to IEA for sharing this expertise through this webinar. We'd like to see more of these with IEA and all of our and all of CTCN's network members. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. You'll get a shot. We're not IEA. We're the IEA Greenhouse Gas R&D program. We're not allowed to masquerade ourselves as the IEA in Paris. They get quite stroppy with us.
Thank you.
Moving quickly on, this is the second in a series of ones that we intend to follow up now. This one is working on biomass bio-CCS. I will move on now and just introduce my colleague Jasmine Kemper, who is going to introduce this. Jasmine is, I should say, Dr. Engineer Jasmine Kemper joined us about 4 years ago. You can see her brief there. She's recently completed several activities on us relating to accounting of biomass and negative emissions, and has just recently contributed a paper to a special issue of the International Journal of Greenhouse Gas Control, which I have the honour of being the editor-in-chief to, which updates the information on CCS in general from the 2005 special issue, special report on CCS. And at that point, I'll let us get to the quick, which is Jasmine and her discussion on Bio-CCS.
Yeah, thank you, John, and yeah, welcome everyone to this webinar, which is on a review of biomass with carbon capture and storage. And I would also quickly like to refer you to our handout material, and this handout material will include a glossary, because I'm using quite a lot of abbreviations and we are a bit short on time, and so I don't want to explain every abbreviation, so please refer to the glossary. And there are also some references for further reading and some background material for your further reference in there. So yeah, what is the rationale behind Bio-CCS? Several international organizations such as the IEA and the IPCC acknowledge the role that Bio-CCS can play in reducing atmospheric GHG emissions in their reports. So most of all, the recent fifth assessment report of the IPCC, and within that mitigation measures mentioned there, Bio-CCS fares quite prominently. So next to more efficient use of energy, greater use of low carbon and no carbon energy technologies, life cycle and behavioral changes. We also now have bioenergy with carbon capture and storage within the remit of the improved carbon sinks, which in the past usually was focusing on deforestation, afforestation, and forest management activities. So usually the mitigation scenarios limiting global increase in temperature to around 2 degrees C are not likely, in the opinion of the IPCC and IEA, to achieve their goal when excluding or severely limiting this bioenergy with carbon capture and storage potential. So Bio-CCS shows significant potential to achieve these reductions at a cost that is comparable with other mitigation options that were assessed in these reports, while it at the same time could provide technical versatility, valuable temporary flexibility, and also an approach for sectors where reductions are much harder to achieve. So if we now move on, because there's a bit of confusion sometimes about the terminology used around Bio-CCS or BECCS, a term which you might have come across as well. And yeah, usually Bio-CCS and BECCS are alternative terms for the coupling of bioenergy with CCS. I've pulled out some definitions from several reports here who define Bio-CCS and BECCS for you. I won't go into much detail. They are more for your reference later on. And yeah, the main conclusion is that throughout the literature, the terminology and definition is not consistent, and both terms seem or appear to be used more or less interchangeably. So in general, Bio-CCS seems to have a bit wider context than BECCS, and a lot of publications refer to BECCS as bioenergy and CCS in relation to the power sector. So Bio-CCS seems to have a bit wider context, and that's why in this webinar I will also use the term Bio-CCS, because it would always include the scope of BECCS. And yeah, if you go on from Bio-CCS, you also soon encounter the term Bio-CCU, that's biomass with carbon capture and utilization, which describes the use of the captured biogenic CO2 for the production of fuels, chemicals, or other materials. So yeah, you now here see the concept of Bio-CCS, so what it's actually all about. And Bio-CCS can usually achieve a net removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. The CO2 is usually bound during the growth of the biomass and then subsequently captured from the biomass conversion process and stored into a geological formation. And in case of Bio-CCU, however, we have to be mindful that the carbon storage is not permanently, it's more an intermediate, because at the end of the process, the CO2 is usually again emitted to the atmosphere. For example, when the fuel is combusted. And this is also underlined by this graph, which shows the carbon balance of different energy systems in comparison, especially the comparison between fossil fuel systems and bioenergy systems with and without CCS. In this graph, gray color denotes carbon of fossil origin and blue color denotes carbon of biogenic origin. And what you can see here is that the standard fossil fuel system has a positive net carbon balance. And if we then apply CCS to the fossil fuel system, we end up with a less positive system by storing the emissions underground. Renewable energy systems, such as solar or wind energy, usually have a neutral to slightly positive carbon balance. And yeah, you usually always have in the fossil system or in the renewable system a residual amount of emissions that will occur. And this also applies to the bioenergy systems. However, the bioenergy systems are the ones that can actually pull CO2 from the atmosphere. A bioenergy system without CCS, such as just combustion of biomass for electricity production with subsequent emission of CO2 to the atmosphere, would be also neutral to slightly positive. And yeah, the bioenergy system with CCS has an important role because it can pull out the CO2 from the atmosphere and store it permanently underground. And this actually then would give us the opportunity to address historic atmospheric CO2 emissions in comparison to just decrease the rate by which CO2 is added to the atmosphere by applying CCS to fossil fuels. So several studies investigated the global bioenergy potential. And there's quite a wide range of that potentials. You can find numbers between 50 exajoules per year up to 1,000 exajoules per year published in the literature. However, most of those studies agree on a conservative potential of at least around 100 exajoules per year of bioenergy in 2050. And the large variations in the estimates are due to several uncertainties and limitations. And some of them include, for example, the impact or the future forecast of crop yields, the land availability, future price structures and market outlooks, and also sometimes the lack of a comparable or standard methodology and the underlying assumptions. And so it's important to keep in mind that also when you come across those potentials, that sometimes you have to be wary that the economically exploitable potential might be smaller than the values found. And similar applies to the global potential of bio-CCS deployment. You can also see that those estimates can vary quite significantly, here covering almost everything between 0 and 20 gigatons of CO2 per year. And those studies that use the kind of agreeable minimum bioenergy potential of those 100 exajoules per year usually correspond to about 10 gigatons of CO2 per year in 2050 as a bio-CCS potential. Important to keep in mind, however, that in order to achieve those 2-degree scenario emissions reduction, we might need around 2 times of that potential. And again, here in those potentials, there are related uncertainties and differences. Some of them are due to the involved land area requirements, emissions from land use change or look, crop yields again. Some estimates only or methodologies only consider the CO2 emissions, but do not address the other greenhouse gases that are related. And yeah, also again, different assumptions and models used for those estimates. There's also a bit of uncertainty regarding the time frame for bio-CCS to deliver those contributions to emissions reductions. And studies found that those time frame could be anywhere between a decade and half a century. At IEAGHG, we commissioned a study to Ecofys to look a bit deeper into the negative emissions potential for bio-CCS. In 2010, or 2011. And yeah, the most important results were evaluating several different routes for bio-CCS, which would include bio-CCS in the power sector through dedicated or co-firing, and also some biofuel production routes. The study found that the technical potential could be up to 10 gigaton per year, and the economic potential would be, in all cases, only around 1/3 or 1/2 of this technical potential. And there were certain assumptions used for the studies, such as a CO2 price at 50 euros per ton, and also co-firing shares ramping up from 30% in 2030 to 50% in 2050. And one important disclaimer is the numbers in this graph, they are not additive, as the assessment was done route by route. So the study assumed that all available biomass would be directed to one route. So if we would have different pathways implemented simultaneously, the potentials would be smaller, of course. And yeah, the main result from the study was that IGCC, BECCS, and Fischer-Tropsch biodiesel appeared to be the most promising options in regards to economically exploitable potential. We then did an update to the study 2 years later for several biomethane production routes. And the main message is that for all these routes, the technical potential and economic potentials were significantly smaller than for the previous routes. And that, yeah, some of the smaller anaerobic digestion routes, those usually considered small niche routes, appeared to be most promising in terms of the economic potential. And we also found out that there needs to be certain natural gas or CO2 prices in place in order to enable deployment of those routes. So as we have now had a look at the technical and economic potentials for bio-CCS technologies, maybe it's now a good time to have an overview of where is bio-CCS actually taking place or planned throughout the world. And at this point, I would also like to refer you back to the handout, because if you're interested in all the numbers and more information about the projects, there is a comprehensive table in your handout material listing all the projects, their carbon sources, their carbon sinks, their CO2 capacities, and so on. And conclusions from a review of those bio-CCS projects worldwide is that, yeah, a number of projects already exist, including first commercial scale demonstration projects. But of course, many more are necessary to build up and strengthen confidence in bio-CCS in general. And also, as we will see in a couple of minutes, many of these operational projects at the moment focus on ethanol fermentation as the CO2 source and enhanced oil recovery as the CO2 sink. And you also see that there are like two focal areas where the development seems to take place. That is in North America, especially in the US, and also in several places across Europe. And there's also a bit of a challenge involved in listing down these bio-CCS projects, because bio-CCS is such a versatile technology. Any CCS project on fossil fuels could become a bio-CCS project simply by switching all or part of their fuels. So I would now like to take you a bit deeper into some of those projects. And yeah, first and foremost, maybe the most relevant bio-CCS project at the moment is the IBDP or the ICCS project. Those projects are located in Illinois in the US. The Illinois Basin Decatur project, which is operational since November 2011, captures around 0.33 megatons of CO2 per year from an Archer Daniels Midland ethanol plant for storage into a sandstone and saline formation. And they successfully completed injection of 1 megatons of CO2 in 2014, and they have now just entered a 3-year post-injection monitoring program, and the whole project is sponsored and overseen by the US Department of Energy. The Illinois Industrial CCS project is now the successor of the IBDP, and has now ramped up the CO2 capacity to 1 million tons per year. And it's the aim of the project to store a total of 3.6 megatons of CO2 per year. Two other American projects are applied to ethanol fermentation plants of Conestoga Energy Partners. One is the Arcalon project, the other one is the Bonanza project. They are both located in Kansas, and they both capture between 0.29 and 0.15 megatons of CO2 per year from ethanol fermentation. Both projects mainly store or use the CO2 for CO2 enhanced oil recovery, one in Texas and one in a closer field nearby in Kansas. And the Arcalon project also recently in 2013 started to store a part of the CO2 that is captured in a sandstone formation. So it's not exclusively CO2 EOR anymore, but also geological storage. Another very interesting project is the OCAP project in the Netherlands, where 0.1 megatons of CO2 per year, again from an ethanol plant, is captured, and the CO2 is utilized in nearby greenhouses. So strictly speaking, this is not a Bio-CCS project, but a Bio-CCU project, which is operating since 2011. However, this project is part of a wider cluster development under the Rotterdam Climate Initiative. And so it will be potentially a combination of a fossil and bio CCU and CCS project in the future. So the current development plans for a hub connecting additional CO2 players, ramping up to 2.5 megatons of CO2 per year in 2050, and eventually 17.5 megatons of CO2 per year in 2025. And as mentioned, the hub will include a mixture of biogenic and fossil CO2, both from power and industry sector, and involve utilization in the greenhouses, as well as storage of CO2 in a gas reservoir in the North Sea. And part of that project is also the road project, which is in charge of planning a new build unit at the Maasvlakte power plant, which would deliver around 1.1 megatons of CO2 per year, and which would be ready for biomass co-firing shares of up to 2050. So this is really a nice example on how important infrastructure and cluster development is for CCS development in general. Another noteworthy project, which is located in the UK, is the White Rose CCS project. And this is located at the existing Drax power station site, and is planning to build a new build oxy-fuel power plant, which would be ready for bio-CCS by co-firing, and which would in the end then capture 2 megatons of CO2 per year for storage into a sandstone formation in the North Sea. And the project is currently scheduled to start operating in 2019. And what's also interesting to note maybe about the existing Drax power station, Drax has a plan to convert 3 of the existing coal-fired units to biomass. 2 of those units are already converted and now online, and the 3rd is expected to be online maybe later this year or next year. And in total then those units would burn around 2.3 million tons per unit of mainly imported biomass. The White Rose CCS project is also related to the UK government CCS commercialization program. And it's the aim of that program to support practical experience in the design, construction, operation of commercial-scale CCS projects, and also includes those using biomass as a fuel source. And also the White Rose project has already received approval for funding under the new entrance reserve NER 300 for about £240 million. So I would like to take you a bit further on how or what's the status or the prospect of bio-CCS in the UK. And yeah, as you can see from the graphs, which are all taken from the 2012 UK bioenergy strategy, you can see that bioenergy as a proportion of primary energy demand is forecast to increase at least until 2040 or 2045, from about now currently around 3 to 4% to around 15 or more %. And so, and also the other graph, which goes into a bit more detail regarding the sectoral application of bioenergy with and without CCS. You can see that bio-CCS is considered to be essential for the power sector in the UK. And especially in that context, forest biomass from North America will be a key factor in this development. And at the moment, for example, Drax, who is already using biomass from North America, they are currently heavily extending their involvement in the North American wood pellet sector. And there's still a bit about uncertainty about bio-CCS role in the transport sector. But the UK Department of Energy and Climate Change aims at updating that bioenergy strategy every 5 years, and in a couple of years or next year or the year after it will be due for renewal. And it will be interesting to see how bio-CCS would then fare or maybe get a bit of more prominent role. And the Energy Technologies Institute in the UK also did a very interesting study identifying the locational preferences for bio-CCS and related biomass supply with and without imports. And this is really a nice case study because it shows you how CCS clusters development and also the biomass supply could change if you take into account imports. And you can see here, for example, that with imports, it's especially apparent that the Teesside CCS cluster and the Thames CCS cluster will be the focal points of development. And you can also see that short rotation copies and to some extent also miscanthus and long rotation forestry will take part in the development. And compared to that, without imports, we would see a lot more indigenous biomass production in the UK, which would be mainly focused on miscanthus. And you could then also see that we don't have those two clusters as a focal point anymore. The development is much more spread out through all the centers that are suitable for bio-CCS deployment. So as we have now seen a bit about the potentials of bio-CCS, it would be interesting to get a bit deeper into the costs. And please note that this graph is just indicative. So it's not corrected for the different times where the estimates took place and also not to the different assumptions that were used. And so we note that there is still room for improvement in the assessment of current and future costs of the bio-CCS. And it's also not clear at the moment where, in the end, cost-effective bio-CCS deployment would take place, both in terms of sector and location. One message from the studies out there is that costs are likely in the same order as fossil CCS. And the whole ballpark range usually would cover, at the moment, around between $60 and $250 per ton of CO2, with probably small niche biomethane and biofuel applications at the low end, and and dedicated firing for electricity production at the higher end. And yeah, what's also important to notice is that, of course, limiting factors apply to the cost of bio-CCS, and one of the most limiting factors would be the availability of sustainable and low-cost biomass in this context. And another interesting study was done by McLaren in 2012, assessing both the technology readiness level of bio-CCS and the estimated future deployment costs. And so the general message is that bio-CCS and its CCS components are technically feasible as of today and cover a range in this graph of technology readiness level from 3 to 7. You could argue that with now the progress being made, especially in the projects like in Illinois, that the TRL could be a bit more updated to maybe towards 7 to 8 for these ethanol-based bio-CCS projects. However, there are still some technical challenges left, which might limit the bio-CCS potential, and these are mainly in gasification-based technologies, and also there are some issues left with co-firing very large shares of biomass. But this is quite an interesting graph if you want to put it into perspective with other negative emission technologies. We also had a look in one of our studies, which Carbon Counts did for us, regarding the role of bio-CCS and negative emission technologies in accounting frameworks. And the main result is that currently many policies and accounting frameworks do not adequately recognize and reward bio-CCS. Many of them do not cover life cycle or land use change emissions. And this is important because land use change emissions could be significant and could in the end render the negative emissions assumptions invalid. And also, like the EU ETS, which is the largest existing carbon market at present, does not explicitly include bio-CCS. However, the UNFCCC's clean development mechanism would cover bio-CCS, and in many other jurisdictions such as the EU and in California, there are already discussions underway on how to include bio-CCS in the schemes. However, those processes are political, long-lasting, and very complex. So yeah, it's apparent that it might take a while until they are ready to cover bio-CCS. And yeah, those gaps in policies are also one reason for a low investment confidence in bio-CCS at the moment. So if there is no incentive to achieve negative emissions over just zero emissions, apparently, why should an operator go to the extent of doing bio-CCS instead of just burning or co-firing biomass? And yeah, this makes it apparent that more research into subsidies, trade barriers, and also financial instruments apart from the CDM is necessary in the future. Even if we would have solved all these mentioned issues with regards to bio-CCS so far, there is still one which might be a showstopper, and that's the public acceptance of CCS and bio-CCS. So in conclusion, the research on bio-CCS in particular is quite limited. There's quite a lot of research on public perception and acceptance of CCS out there, but not a lot of those studies have looked into bio-CCS in particular. And those that have came up with quite contradicting results. And the only agreement was that, yeah, the socio-cultural context of the stakeholders is very important. And in general, it's also that bio-CCS seems to have a lower public profile than fossil CCS in the media. And in many surveys, the participants typically see other mitigation options as preferable to CCS or bio-CCS. And many of them also stated a lack of trust in information originating especially from industry, but also from government. So that's definitely an area where the bio-CCS and CCS community has to work on. And yeah, some of the studies noted that CCS could induce a negative connotation. Some were opposed to the storage aspect. However, the bioenergy aspect could, in some regions, have a positive connotation. For example, in German-speaking areas, bio is usually evoking something positive like naturalness or healthiness. So that could help bio-CCS deployment or not. Yeah, the answers to those questions are still out there. So if we now go on to summarize the drivers and barriers for bio-CCS. So the most important, in my opinion, are first and foremost the reliable supply of low-cost sustainable biomass, which sounds a bit like a jack of all trades, but which is really crucial. Then, of course, the level of maturity of some bio-CCS technologies. For example, those gasification-based technologies are a bit less mature, and then the financial risk would be a bit higher. And also, yeah, the more positive public perception than fossil CCS could be a driver in areas where that applies. Important is also the existence of a suitable infrastructure and the related operating experience, especially yeah, transport not only for the biomass but also then for the natural gas or the CO2. And an important driver is the presence of CCUS options. And for example, at the moment, we have seen that EOR in the US is a driver for bio-CCS projects there. And also, in the end, of course, it boils down to the CO2 price. Another important thing to consider is that we need to see bio-CCS deployment within the so-called food, water, energy, climate nexus. So what is a nexus? A nexus generally means that actions in one of its sectors will have an impact in at least one or more of the other sectors as well. And although the overall impacts remain uncertain due to the diversity of bio-CCS pathways and the complexity of interactions, it is quite clear that a resolution of the sustainability issues around bio-CCS cannot take place outside this context. So you can see here in the graph that, for example, some interactions could include how yeah, climate change could affect food and fiber production by affecting crop yields, and also climate change will have an influence on the water availability that's used for irrigating those plants, and also the water that's available for use in the energy conversion system. So you could try to summarize maybe some of the main concerns in this context. That's, for example, also the competition between food and bioenergy crops. There might be room for carbon leakage, which means a shift of GHG or CO2 emissions from one sector to the other, especially in connection with a land use change and impacts, and also the impact that a large-scale biomass infrastructure, trade and supply chains have on the communities where they take place. As mentioned before, for example, also the impact on climate change on crop yields. And also important to take into account the water footprint of the bio-CCS system. That can be quite different for different bio-CCS systems, and could depend on what type of biomass you use and to what extent you use the biomass. Do you use the whole biomass or only parts of biomass? And yeah, then of course, how sustainable those biomass feedstocks are produced. And yeah, generally, as mentioned, land use change is an important area of discussion. And we usually divide between direct land use change and indirect land use change. Direct land use change occurs where new areas, for example, responsible cultivation areas or forest areas, such as circle A here in the picture, are used to produce additional feedstock demand for bioenergy. This type of land use change is quite straightforward because it can be measured quite accurately. In contrast, indirect land use change occurs when existing plantations are used to cover feedstock demand, displacing previous production function of the land, such as circle B, which would then lead to expansion of the land used for biomass production to new areas, such as the other B circles you see here. And this is much harder to track and to measure, and causes a bit of a headache in current discussions about biomass sustainability. So in summary, land use change can cause, as mentioned by a lot of studies, negative effects, for example, such as loss of biodiversity, increase the CO2 emissions, and also other GHG emissions, loss of carbon stores. But some studies also mentioned it can also cause positive effects. For example, it can provide the opportunity to change to more sustainable practices or to restore degraded lands for bioenergy production. So one thing that a lot of studies mentioned also is that bio-CCS feedstocks might then experience a limitation to what's called truly additional biomass. And additional biomass means biomass that's delivering GHG reductions, but without displacing the other ecosystem services, such as carbon sequestration or food and fiber production. So maybe a kind of a summary is land use change emissions can be significant, and because they can be significant, they will likely be the linchpin of sustainable bio-CCS deployment. So in order to conclude the webinar, the ability of bio-CCS to deliver negative emissions reductions is important to achieve our climate change mitigation targets. The majority of the research suggests a potential of around 100 exajoules per year for bioenergy and around 10 gigatons of CO2 per year for bio-CCS deployment. Costs are more or less comparable to fossil CCS, but are still quite uncertain due to the lack of experience with large-scale commercial projects. There are several projects underway, which is a good sign, but we will need lots more to build up the confidence. And we will also need to address the policy, regulatory, and financial issues that are needed to facilitate bio-CCS deployment. And maybe very important to notice is that bio-CCS deployment will hinge on case-specific details, with the sustainable biomass supply likely to be the linchpin. So it will not be easy to transfer results and indications from one study, from one system or one region to another. And as mentioned within the sustainability discussions, an approach covering the whole nexus will be required to tackle all those issues. So with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. The last slide just lists for your reference the IEAGHG publications on bio-CCS. So that's our technical reports I referred to in the webinar, and also some other publication we published, such as the paper in the International Journal of Greenhouse Gas Control, and also some other conference and journal papers. So thank you, and if you have any questions, please feel free to put them forward to us now or email us, and we will then address them afterwards.
Thank you, Jasmine. Yeah, well, we do have a few questions that have come through the system, and I will pitch some of those in now. We have a question of why do we not include pyrolytic processes in our assessments that leave the carbon behind? We're talking about biochar here.
Mm-hmm. We haven't done any study on this so far, so our studies have only included the other bio-CCS routes. There are other studies out there that have, I think, addressed and looked into biochar. I think the IEA Clean Coal Center is also worked on that in a bit more detail. Yeah, but that's yeah, definitely yeah, a good point. Of course, it would be valuable to include as much opportunities and pathways as possible.
Yeah, I remember a report by GCSI in the Australian context on biochar, and came out very much as a niche activity there. And there has been some recent literature I've seen, or some recent articles in the in the literature that conflict this idea that soils universally benefit from the increased carbon, but it is something we need to we will need to look at. I've got another question. Is BECCS?
And I think if I can refer back to the slide I showed with the cost and the TRL, I think McLaren in his assessment has also taken biochar into account in comparison with the other negative emission technologies.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a reference point for the person who's asking the question. Another question is well, I've now got BCCS as well as Bio-CCS and BECCS. So we've now got a third acronym for it. Is it a complement or a substitute with other biomass uses, particularly talking about biogas here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And that would, I think, in my opinion, essentially boil down to whether you rather want to have zero emissions or negative emissions.
Okay. I mean, I tend to think of biogas, am I right here, Yasmin, as coming from sort of anaerobic digestion type sources and use of wet wastes and things. Am I correct in my assumption there? So whereas we're talking about sort of more like pelletized wood and this, that, and that. If that's the case, then I'd probably see it as a complement. Yeah.
Yeah, it's It also depends on how the policies are. Do the policies allow for negative emissions? And because if you just have it complementary, you might not reach the emissions reductions that we need to reach. So we might run out of options to just see it as complementary.
Okay. I think we're sort of starting to run out of time. Well, I've got one other question. Well, it's more a comment than anything. Apparently there's a project in Europe called CO2 Dissolved that BRGM and amongst others are running.
Yep.
And there they have a sort of a hybrid CCS chain on a geothermal power plant. The carbon is injected in a dissolved form with energy coming from a geothermal source. This technology could well be implemented on small source of CO2 between 10 kilotons and 100 kilotons of CO2 a year, which seems to suit quite well with a BECCS process. Comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And if you look back at the routes that Ecofys has assessed for us, it's quite apparent that certain small-scale niche applications appear very favorably for Bio-CCS, especially in terms of economic potential. And I agree it's an excellent idea to try to couple Bio-CCS and also fossil CCS with renewables to reduce the fossil fuel input into that systems. And I'm aware and the table summarizing the Bio-CCS projects in the handout material also mentions the Artenay project in France. And that's I think also one of the activities that's going on that small scale, and the publications in relation to that project were mentioning that the CO2 footprint is reduced more or less depending on what you apply as a technology, and they made the recommendation, I think, that it would be favorable to look into decarbonizing by reducing the fossil fuel input, for example, for biomass pretreatment and things like that, to also cover that by bioenergy.
Okay. I think we had another question in here, was about the transport and LCA of process, and I think you in part answered that.
Yeah.
I think it's time now. Our time is up. We've got a lot more questions through the system. We will answer those online. An email out with the presentation at the end. So thank you one and all for listening. Thank you to CTC ETN for collaborating with us on this activity. And Jasmine has very bravely put her contact details up there, so you can contact her directly if you have any other questions or references to reports, etc. Yep. So I'll call this to an end. Thank you very much, all indeed, and thank you, Jasmine, for a very interesting presentation.
You're welcome.